the primary focus of these lives is not so much a debate. We can have them and we can have discussions, but the primary focus is to upskill people that are interested in faith and trying to seek truth on different areas, predominantly Islam, the Quran, the Sunnah, and from a biblical narrative as well, to sort of upskill them in terms of some of the new scholarship that's out there and the ramifications for those particular findings and what they are. So today, inshallah, we'll be discussing the Torah, and whether or not there's just one Torah or there are many different types of Torahs, what Torahs are common or uncommon, and then specifically we'll be discussing the Moses scrolls. I don't want to give any spoilers away, so I'll probably let the brother sort of run with this. Start off with a little bit of a background in terms of what a recension is, the different types, and why it's such a significant area of discussion with respect to the veracity of the Old Testament, or ascertaining the veracity of the Old Testament, and then we can inshallah go from there. Please do take notes along the way, and if you have questions along the way, ask them in the comments. There are some mods on here as well, so inshallah, please, I'd request you to just manage the comments so there's nothing crazy happening. Without further ado, I'll pass it off to Akhi Beyond and Akhi Ali. I'll go on mute for most of the part, but I might chip in with a few words here and there, but go ahead, inshallah.
All right. Bismillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Thank you all for attending and for potentially, inshallah ta'ala, incorporating towards the end. This particular presentation, I would have to kind of extend a bit of apologies first, because it is a completely new study for me. It's not something that I've delved into for any prolonged period of time, but this is not any slight towards myself or like anything uncommon, because even among scholars of the Bible, among Old Testament scholars, this is not something that has been studied with any type of enthusiasm or any type of regularity, as we'll see from some quotations that I'm going to provide by biblical scholars themselves. Okay, so this presentation is going to be about a discovery by a person named Moses Shapira, an antiquarian and a linguist from the Jerusalem, Palestine area, who discovered something very akin to the Dead Sea Scrolls multiple decades before their discovery, and the whole story behind how it was relegated to the category of forgery, and then how the case was reopened, reestablished, and now many scholars are beginning to adopt the position that they were in fact authentic the entire time, or at least advocating for a new critical examination of the reasons that were provided for labeling them as forgeries to begin with. Okay, so let me begin by saying that this is not controversial for any Christians or Jews who are listening to this. This wouldn't be something that is completely unheard of. A new recension or a new piece of insight being or a new light being shed on the history of a text that gives it kind of a radical different look. This happens in the New Testament all the time. We know this from patristic literature, and we know this from manuscript studies. So for patristic literature, you need to look no further than the fragments of Papias of Hierapolis. Many Christians often bring this fragment as support for the antiquity or for the originality of the Gospels, but in reality, anyone who looks into this fragment will see it's completely the opposite. What we know from that particular fragment that's provided by Eusebius, it passes pretty much all the historical criteria of it being a real fragment from the Kyrikon Logion that Eusebius most likely had access to. But what we know is that Mark was a lot different before our canonical Mark. Matthew was a lot different from canonical Matthew. Luke was a lot different than canonical Luke, not from that fragment, but from what we know about Marcionite studies. And John, there are many fragments and traditions, both in the manuscripts and in the scholarly literature, as well as in patristic citations, about how John might have looked in the beginning centuries. So Mark initially was some sort of historical document in which the narratives were not placed in chronological order. And the objective of this original piece of composition was to not omit anything. And it was supposedly from the memoirs of Peter. Okay, none of these pieces of identification actually match with our current gospel according to Mark. Mark is the shortest gospel. It has the least amount of details. It has none of the specific, unique Petrine material that are found in Matthew and John. And it is in such good order that it served as a template for the other two synoptics. So what we know from Papias of Hierapolis is that this gospel that we now call according to Mark existed in a different form. And not only that, we have this phenomenon that's called secret Mark. Secret Mark, which was discovered by a man named Morton Smith in the Barsaba Monastery, also decades ago. Also declared a forgery, and also now scholars are reaching a consensus that it is at least authentic back to the pen of Clement of Alexandria. So we have at least two different forms of the Gospel of Mark, contrary to our current canonical Gospel according to Mark. So this should not be strange. If you're familiar with New Testament scholarship, this should not be a boogeyman for you. Okay, the same thing with the Gospel according to Matthew. Matthew, according to that same Papian fragment, was a Logion Gospel, something in which shares similarities with sayings Gospels like the Dialogue of the Savior, or the Q documents, or the Gospel according to Thomas. Literally says the Apocryphon Logion, the secret sayings, which Jesus I pain to Mathetes Thomas. So the secret sayings of Jesus which he gave to his disciple Thomas. These are sayings. Matthew, as we have it today, is not a sayings gospel. It is in the same format as the gospel according to Mark, following more or less the same sequence. And so that's a different recension of the gospel according to Matthew. We have from the patristic literature the Ebionites and the Nazarenes and the Jewish communities appealing to a Matthean-like gospel called the gospel according to the Hebrews. That is, maybe it is the same thing that Papias was talking about, or perhaps it is a third recension. This is not very uncommon. Okay. For the gospel according to John, we have the Manichaean gospel of John, which is basically a red letter gospel according to John. We know this from Augustine's dialogue with Faustus, where Faustus accuses the scribes of incorporating frivolous narratives, and that the Gospel of John originally was only a sayings tradition. And this is what many scholars actually hold, that portions of the Gospel of John resemble Aramaic saying traditions. And so they separate the strata and the development of the Gospel of John from material that's extracted from the synoptics, and material that's extracted from the sayings traditions, and material that is redacted later on, like John chapter 21 and the prologue. So that's for the gospel according to John. And for Luke, I don't have to go much into anything other than Marcion of Sinope. Marcion of Sinope's version was a completely different version, and I would just point you to the reconstructions that have been posited by people like Matthias Klinghardt, or Jason Bedun, or David Trobisch, or Dieter Roth, or Adolf von Harnack, and others who have composed reconstructions of that text. Marcus Vincent is currently working on one now. So that's for the New Testament is my wheelhouse, and those are the quote-unquote recensions that exist for the New Testament, and there are many more. I can go on all day, actually. So if Brother Ali would be courteous enough, may you please tell us about some of the recensions. I know an angel gets his wings every time you hear recension of the Old Testament. لو سمحت حبيبي, because I'm sweating bullets.
بارك الله فيك أخي.
وفيكم بارك الله.
You see, on page 6 of Emmanuel's 12th book on the Septuagint, he says the Masoretic text, the Hebrew text which they have today, he says, is not the Torah, is one of the text forms of the Torah. This is very important to understand. The Hebrew text that they have today is not the Torah, is one of the text form. Why do they say that? Based on the foundings of Geniza or the Qumran community. They have found a scala of manuscripts, many of them. So based on that, they are comparing all of these texts which they have. The earliest which they have is what they call Paleo-Hebrew, is paleographically dated, is about 250 or 300 BCE. This one is the earliest which they have. After that, they have the Paleo-Hebrew of the Qumran community. That is, these are the Dead Sea Scrolls, and also the Hebrew text, they have it in the Dead Sea Scrolls. These are dated somewhat between 200 BCE or 300 CE, are used by carbon dating to date them. In there, they have found about 900 fragments, and out of those, about 200 are what they call biblical, 200 out of those 900. And these 200 fall under 5 big categories of what kind of text are they. One of them is what they call the text written in Qumran practice. This was used for the people to practice how to write, how to copy. The other text type is what they call the Proto-Masoretic text. This is the forerunner to the Masoretic text, or the Rabbinic text as it's called. Another group text, which is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, is what they call the pre-Samaritan text. This is the forerunner to the Samaritan Torah, which is conformed by a couple of paleo fragments in the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of them is 4Q, Paleo Exodus, and also 4Q, the Book of Numbers. And these have many similarities, by the way, to the Septuagint. The fourth one is the forerunner to the Hebrew of the Septuagint. And one of the other one, or the last part, is what is called non-aligned text. Non-aligned text. Many texts are not exclusively close to any one of the texts mentioned above, out of those 200 fragments which I was talking about, and are therefore considered non-aligned. They agree sometimes significantly with the Masoretic text against other texts, or they agree with Samaritan Torah against the other text, but the non-aligned text also disagrees with the other text to the same extent. So Dead Sea Scrolls is a mix of couple of forelage of text which they had, and other text which is unique to it, mix of the forerunners to other families of text, and a kind of text which is non-aligned to any of them. And after that, they have something which they call the Septuagint. Septuagint means 70 in Greek. This is based on they call it a legend of the letter of Aristeas, in which he is talking about King Ptolemy. He's saying he went to every tribe of the Jews. They took 6 men out of them, 72 together, and they translated the Torah into the Greek. This is what the Septuagint is. Later on, all the other books of the Old Testament in Greeks are tagged on this Torah version. You understand? So it's a process to which they have. Yet this Septuagint is actually what the New Testament bases its grounds on. When they are quoting the old scriptures, or what they call the prophets or the writings, most of the time, if not all, except a couple of exceptions, they are quoting a Greek version of the old scriptures. Greek version of the old scriptures. The same Emmanuel Toff says, Paul For example, in Romans chapter 3, he does something which is called pearl stringing. He takes verses out of every book which has nothing to do with each other. He puts them together to make a new substance. Only for that, he used 3 different recensions of the Greek version, which they had 3 different. In the 2nd century, the student of Rabbi Akiva, which is Aquila or Onkelos as they call it, he came with the Targum, but also with a Greek recension which he had. It was very literal. After that, there is some say he was a Samaritan Jew who became a Christian, or some say he was an Ebionite, Symmachus. He also had the Septuagint, also a Greek text. You see, these two do not agree with each other. I'll give one example to make it clear. The LXX, which Origen in Haxapla had, for example, in the book of Psalms, chapter 22, verse 16, the Hebrew text says, they are around me like lions. Yet the LXS of Origen, it says, they have pierced my hands and feet. Yet the Septuagint of Symmachus doesn't say that. They have bounded my hands, it says, bounded, not pierced. You see, only one verse makes such a difference in theology. This Alexandrianus.
Sorry, Brother Ali, can you just repeat that, what you were referring to just now, the 3 recensions that you referred to, and the one verse that you quoted? Can you just mention that just quickly again?
Sure. The Hebrew text which they have today, this Masoretic text, which the Jews and the King James and most of these translation in English is based on, in the Hebrew text, in Psalms chapter 20, verse 16 or 17, it depends which recension and which counting you use. It says they are around me like lions. Ka-ari, like Ari is lion, like a lion, they surrounded me. Yet the earlier Greek version of that, which most of these Christians today use, it says they have pierced my hand and my feet. Yet the earlier recension of the Greek text by Symmachus in the 2nd century, it does not say they have pierced my hands and my feet. There goes the prophecy out the window. They have bound my hand. It says, for example, this is also to be read in the New English translation of the Bible. You see?
Can I give another relevant example for the Christians, if you don't mind? Between the LXX, the Hebrew, and one of the more modern, like 2nd century Greek translations. Everybody knows Isaiah chapter 7. Isaiah chapter 7. Or a virgin shall conceive a child. A virgin shall conceive a child. In the Hebrew word is alma, which just means a young woman or a woman of marriageable age. The Septuagint version, the I guess received text of the Septuagint, says that a virgin will be with child, parthenos. And the text of the Greek version of Theodosius, or Theodotion, which is the 3rd translation made around the year 180, says it translates the Hebrew properly. When he was doing the translation, he translated it into genes or geneka, so you have one that says a woman shall conceive child, which is genes or gene, and then one that says a young woman or a young girl, and then one that says virgin. So depending on which one you choose, can actually substantiate the Immaculate Conception or not.
So you see, when I come back to my first statement, there is no such a thing as the Torah. There are multiple things which are called the Torah. So we are giving example, which one is it? The Jews of today, they have something which they call textus receptus, which means the received text. They have one which is called Codex Aleppo, which they say Maimonides used this one. This is the Torah of Maimonides. This is why it's such an importance, Codex Aleppo. But the complete version which they have comes from a codex which is in Russia, in St. Petersburg, Codex Leningrad of the year 1008. So early 11th century. So if we ask them which Torah are you talking about, mostly they say the Hebrew Torah. Which Hebrew Torah? I just told you we have the Samaritan Torah. We have this Paleo Hebrew of the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have the Hebrew of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we have this Masoretic text. By the way, the Masoretic text itself is not a unit of a uniformic text, by the way. So in short, based on time, based on findings, based on scholarly understanding of history, we know that every community at different ages, in different states, they had different texts, which them people called the Torah. So today, we're going to talk about a new finding to take us even more back before the 300 BCE, before the Samaritan Torah. Let's see what the situation was there. Akhi Wesam, go ahead.
Thank you, Akhi. Barakallah feek. That was very enlightening, subhanAllah. You teach me new things again. I had no idea Ankylos was a Quila. That is new information, subhanAllah. So yeah, so these manuscripts are sometimes referred to as the Shapira scrolls or the Moses scrolls. Okay, and so they were discovered by a antiquities dealer whose name was Moses Shapira, and he worked. He had kind of a store that sells antique items. He also used to kind of lead expeditions into various countries, including my own country of Yemen, Jerusalem, and other neighboring areas. And he would look for, kind of either bribe the locals into telling him where some maybe potential precious items were located, and he would sell them to libraries and museums. And around the late 1880s, he got word from a Bedouin, somewhere around the Moabite region, about these scrolls that were hidden inside of jars, wrapped in linen, and with a kind of a very putrid smelling black film over them. The letters were very foreign. They couldn't make out any of them because they were written in a different script. And some of the fragments were in good condition and some of them were in bad condition. And so as soon as he found them, he kept an open mind. And this is all from the book The Moses Scrolls by Ross Nichols, who is one of the leading researchers on this topic. Okay, and he provides all of the citations, the handwritten notes between the scholars that they corresponded between each other, discussing these fragments and their reasonings for how they handled them, etc., etc. So once he actually found them, he kept an open mind. He didn't know whether they were authentic or forgeries or not, and he submitted them to a few German scholars, because Germans were, the head of the class of New Testament and Old Testament scholarship. And so he said basically he wanted to get them to the most capable hands possible. Of course, he wanted to make money as well. He was already very notorious for finding manuscripts and very old manuscripts and making money off of them as well. And so one of these people who actually got his hand on the manuscript for a total of 1 hour. His name is Clermont Ganneau. He declared it a forgery, as well as some others around his time, like Blich. They declared it a forgery simply on the grounds that they cannot possibly conceive of a text that contradicts the Bible. They could not conceive of a text being authentic that contradicts the Bible in such blatant ways, right? Because as I'm going to demonstrate some of the variants later on, but you can see the problem with this type of outlook, with this type of perspective, that you're already poisoning the well by saying anything that goes against our archetype of the Old Testament is by default inauthentic. And so this is like a reminder to people who think that Western scholars are always liberal. No, they're not. The field is dominated by people who have a vested interest in affirming the authenticity of these texts. This goes for the New Testament. It goes for the Old Testament. You can see some of my videos where I discuss anecdotes from the scholars who I have reviewed and interviewed. I'm sorry, where they say that some of their theories, although now very well accepted, when they were first bringing them into the forefront of scholarly discussion, they were dismissed by people who didn't even have any expertise in the field. And so James Tabor, he writes the foreword for this book. James Tabor is a leading scholar of the Bible. He teaches at University of North Carolina in Charlotte. I believe either in Charlotte or in Chapel Hill. I think it's Charlotte. So what he says is, he said that when he was taking his PhD, exam, his PhD supervisor was discussing what's called the Damascus document, something that a text that was discovered in the 1900s, but they really had no way of dating it because some of the internal evidence was like all over the place. But then when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found other portions of the Damascus documents, and they actually linked them together. They said, wow, this portion is actually from a manuscript that was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so James Tabor, he asked him, are there any other examples of ancient documents that were discovered around that area? And this is what he said, like word for word. He said, I asked James Tabor, his PhD supervisor, if any Dead Sea Scrolls had ever turned up anywhere before their discovery in 1947 to 1952. He told me there were accounts of such manuscripts being discovered in caves around Jericho in the 3rd century AD. This is by the way, by Epiphanius, and later on Theodoret, who report stories that some people in their area actually discovered old manuscripts around Jericho, like 100 years before their life. And later again in the 9th century. But no copies had survived. He then paused and added, of course, there was also the notorious case of Shapira, a Jerusalem antiquities dealer back in the 1880s. He claimed that he had purchased a scroll from Bedouin, who said they found it in a cave on the east side of the Dead Sea. Very familiar. Shapira tried to sell it to get rich, but it turned out to be a forgery, and Shapira, thoroughly exposed and shamed, put a bullet in his own head. This is how he packaged the entire argument for his young, impressionable PhD student. No word about the impending, where I'm going to discuss about the actual debate around its authenticity. No discussion about possibly reassessing it because of the details of the declaration of forgery were because of things that we now know can't be true. He just told his young, aspiring scholar that it was a forgery, and the guy was so shamed that he unalived himself. And Tabor continues, says, over the next decades, whenever the name Shapira came up in academic circles, this basic storyline was repeated and assumed. I never even gave it a second thought, nor was I curious enough to even find out about the purported contents of this infamous Shapira forgery. See, because he had already sowed the seed of doubt in his mind. I remember many years later, Biblical Archaeology Review ran an article by Rabbi Fred Reiner that laid out the details of the Shapira story under the heading, Tracking the Shapira Case, a Bible Scandal Revised or Revisited. But frankly, I did not pay much attention to it. That was 1997, and by that time, I had been teaching for 20 years. 20 years he has been teaching, including regular courses on the Dead Sea Scrolls. In fact, in the 1990s, I was even involved in the release of the unpublished scrolls and had participated in 3 separate excavations at Qumran. In 2002, Herschel Shanks rehearsed the story again under the title Fakes! An Archaeological Odyssey, end of story. He said, all that changed for me in 2019. Shimon Gibson and I were flying back from the Bethsaida conference at the University of Nebraska, and where we had presented papers. And who did they see when they came off the plane? They saw James Charlesworth. And they had both read the exact same book and struck up a conversation. And James Charlesworth, he told them, You know those scrolls are authentic, right? I think it needs to be re-examined. James Charlesworth is a major scholar. He published many transcriptions of the Dead Sea Scrolls. He handled them. He's one of the few people who's ever been able or allowed into St. Catherine's Monastery to handle unpublished sections of Codex Sinaiticus. And he kept it within himself until a casual conversation on a plane ride back from a conference, and said they're authentic and it should be revisited. Then after that, James Tabor, Ross Nichols, and many other scholars, they've been trying their best to kind of like just put this in the public sphere, because enough scholars have already said that it's authentic. And so that's kind of like a rundown of a very small story about what they are, the beginning stages of the controversy. But I want to get into why they were deemed forgeries to begin with, and why that just can't be the case anymore. And then we'll get into like the differences between this scroll and what we now possess of Deuteronomy in any recension, really. Okay. So let's see here. The reasons for declaring it as a forgery. The first one, as we just discussed, was that it contradicts the Bible. Okay, we can just do away with that reason right away. Anybody with two peas in their brain will know that this is not a criteria for establishing whether a text is authentic or not. Otherwise, we should also stop doing textual criticism on any text and just accept these as the authorial texts and khalas. Okay, or we'll have some arbitrary standards about what is an accepted variant and what is not. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that caves at his time, remember this was decades before the Dead Sea Scrolls discovery. One of the major, if not the major, point of contention around the authenticity or the legitimacy of these scrolls was that caves, especially damp caves in that climate, cannot preserve scrolls for that long, because the paleography, which they were in Paleo-Hebrew letters, matching or even having an older form of the Paleo-Hebrew letters that are found in things like the Mesha Stela, or the Moabite slab, or the Siloam inscription, the Tunnel of Hezekiah. Okay, and there's also an ossuary called the Echumizar sarcophagus. And this text that's in these manuscripts has an older form of Paleo-Hebrew than those, because there are some unidentifiable letters. And so how would a forger, if he had access to these artifacts, why would he make some of the letters unidentifiable? He would want to match them in order to give his text more authenticity. He would want to match exactly what's there on these three only artifacts. So because prior to that, there were no actual manuscripts that had Paleo-Hebrew. They were only known in what's called lapidary examples. These are like inscriptions or things that are non-manuscripts. Inscriptions, graves, ossuaries, skulls, etc., etc. And so that's the second reason, that caves cannot preserve these texts for so long, even though the paleography checks out. The text, remember, the script and the orthography was never in question. So if this was a forgery, this was, as one of those scholars puts it, a most clever forger. And so what we now know is that absolutely caves can preserve leather manuscripts that are at least that old or older. We know this from numerous documents, especially the Dead Sea Scrolls. And now that reason is out the window. That reason is completely out the window. Second is, why would they be wrapped in linen? Perhaps they were trying to avoid, fingerprinting. Perhaps they wanted to give it, the best possibility of surviving or giving it an antique look, etc., etc. But there were Dead Sea Scrolls that were found in the exact same condition, wrapped in linen and covered in a murky film, which is the result of a decomposition or an embalming agent. Because these were actual parchments, basically remnants of animal skin, in Greek they're called memvreia. They needed to be kind of mummified, and mummification was a completely dead form, and these texts were very, very well mummified in that extent. They were wrapped in shrouds of linen, and they were covered in an agent that allowed them to not decompose. So whoever did this was a community that was very, very acquainted with this type of ancient practice.
If you look at the picture here, this is one of the examples of this linen which you are talking about, you see, which they are in Dead Sea Scrolls.
Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair, yeah. I mean, we all have untrained eyes, but again, these were dismissed simply because of the fact of them being wrapped, not because of like the look of them or any type of carbon dating, etc. And this just shows you that they are very quick to dismiss a new finding that doesn't agree with their current narrative. Okay, and then another criteria that they used is that why is it only Deuteronomy? Why is it only Deuteronomy? All these other texts, including the Moabite slab, includes information that was there in like the Book of Kings or Chronicles. But why would it be only the Book of Deuteronomy? Surely a community would have, wanted to preserve other fragments from other sections of the Torah. That is circular, because it's assuming that those texts existed contemporaneously with that particular fragment of Deuteronomy. So you'd have to assume that these other texts were already in circulation, right? You'd have to assume that this community had access to those things. But not only that, but we have examples called the Judean Desert Fragments, Proto-Masoretic manuscripts in parchment that all come from the Pentateuch, mostly from Deuteronomy. There is not there's about 12 of them. There are 12 Judean Desert Fragments that match the Masoretic text more or less. They're very small. They don't have too much content on them, but they're all from the Pentateuch. And what does this show you? This shows you that they were never considered forgeries because they come from the same scribal hand or the same type of community. Why didn't they ask those questions about those Judean Desert Fragments? Why aren't these scribes trying to emulate, trying to like inscribe or copy other portions of the Tanakh? That question was never answered. But with Moses Shapira, the poor guy, Miskeen, they invented a new category in order to dismiss his fragments. So those were some of them. But now there is a lot of positive evidence that could not have been known to Moses Shapira or anyone who was considered the forger of these documents. There's positive evidence to show that this could not have been the case. There is no forger on earth who has access to the unseen. Okay, and one of these is called vertical scoring. Vertical scoring is a phenomenon that exists only in the Dead Sea Scrolls. These fragments contain scribal assisters of how to space out letters by scoring up and down the parchment. Nobody knew this existed. Moses Shapira did not have access to the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so how could this have been possible for him to emulate something that was not even known at his time? A scribal art that was not known.
Sure,
one of the reasons, Akhi, tell them, this is one of the examples of Dead Sea Scrolls which have these guidelines which you said. Ginsberg, he drew. You see, they had couple of hours and at what time couple of days which they spent on this manuscript to study it. They have drawn it. This is how it's look like, because these scrolls are lost now. You see, when they were founded as forgeries, no museum want to buy it, so they have been lost. But these are the drawings which them scholars at the time did. Is Hebrew and Paleo Hebrew.
Can you just touch upon very quickly what the difference between Hebrew and Paleo Hebrew is, just so that people understand?
Sure, today's Hebrew is what they call the Reged script, or the Assyrian script or the broken script is what the Hebrews of today use. The Assyrian or the broken script. Before the Hebrew language came, where did it come from? Hebrew language of Hebrew script at least comes out from what they call now Paleo Hebrew, which means old Hebrew. Paleo means old, which means old Hebrew. They think it is similar, but it is not. It really is not. Whole different script, whole different alphabet, whole different letters. And this old Hebrew came out of Aramaic, which existed before that. So the script of today already has a evolution which went through. This is a link between this evolution of those two scripts.
Jazakallah khair. So what you showed, I didn't want to interrupt you. What you showed are the what's called the interpuncts. Interpuncts are the dots or the illustrations or any type of like colophonic assistance between word separators. What these scholars were pointing to was vertical scoring that allowed a scribe to like by eye gauge the spacing of letters, individual letters. So it's not something that would probably show up on any of these illustrations, but it's something that they noticed when they were actually handling the manuscript. It's called vertical scoring. What you're showing there are like the symbols or the what's called omlats or scolia between words. Those are called interpuncts. And the Judean desert fragments have those as well. Coincidentally, they have those as well. So that was another reason. Another reason is that there was a practice that was actually forbidden in rabbinic literature. That was a developed rule of scriptoriums, of Jewish scriptoriums, meaning you cannot end any Torah scroll, a line of any Torah scroll, by ending it in an incomplete word and continuing it in the next line. This was something that was forbidden. So this clever scribe had to think and say, you know what, this practice is not original, and then he just randomly, arbitrarily decides to end the scroll with the assistance of those vertical scoring to end certain lines of the scroll with an incomplete word and continue it in the next and continue the word in the next line. And what do you know? The Judean desert fragments and the Dead Sea Scrolls have the exact same phenomena, which is a phenomena that was forbidden in rabbinic literature. And there are a lot of other reasons, but I think these were the main reasons for this manuscript to be declared a forgery. One of the other ones is, for example, inconsistent wear between the top portion of a leather parchment and the bottom portion of a leather parchment. So they concluded that these might have been cut from a synagogue, from rolls out of a synagogue, and not something that was done by an archaic community, which many scholars disagreed with, because they actually, when you look at some of the photographs, there is wear on both sides of the manuscript. This is something that I can't speak too much about, because it requires a very keen eye and a very detailed perspective on the distribution of wear and climate and just codicology in general. But it suffices you to know that this was a contentious issue even among people who looked at the Shapira scrolls specifically. Okay, but all the other reasons, they have now been debunked completely. They've been debunked utterly and completely. There is no reason to suspect that these fragments were forgeries. And so what is the difference between the current Shapira scroll and a modern day text of Deuteronomy? So one, shout out to Dog Logic and everyone who recycles the claim, but why Muhammad ain't called God Yahweh though? Why Muhammad ain't called Yahweh though? That stuff. There is not a single use of the Tetragrammaton anywhere in this scroll, which would have again been unthinkable for a scribe to remove it.
I need you to repeat that. Beyond.
So there is not a single usage of the Tetragrammaton, the Yod He Vod He or Yod He Vod He. in the Shapira scroll. There are two places, not one. There's to be fair, there's two that are not in the main body of the text. These are editorial comments that begin the scroll. But the actual scroll, when it starts with Moses' perspective and his speech, there's nothing. Instead, it supplements it with Elohim Eloheinu, God, our God. Right? No Adonai, nothing. God, our God. Elohim Elohim. And this actually matches.
Wesam, why is it important that you mentioned no Adonai but Elohim? Why is that important? Could you explain?
Right, because Adonai would have, if there was Adonai there, then you can cope and say, well, they did not want to say the divine name, so they used the substitute. But Elohim is not the substitute for the Tetragrammaton. It is an actual name of God, and it literally means God in the pluralistic, majestic sense. Okay, so they can't say, well, this long used, tired, unscholarly, unacademic, very bottom level, low IQ argument that why Jesus didn't say the Tetragrammaton is because it was so sacred, so he used Kyrios instead. Even though Jews contemporary to his time had no problem writing it down. Aquila, who we just mentioned, actually transliterated it, wrote the Tetragrammaton in his Greek manuscripts. Clement of Alexandria does it, Origen does it, Qumran community does it, etc., etc. So that's a major stark difference, is that this form of this recension of the book of Deuteronomy does not have the Tetragrammaton. It only exists in the beginning and the end, which are editorial comments, not part of the actual divine, or not the actual revelation or the instructions given to Moses alayhi salam. Okay, that's already huge enough.
That's massive. But just before continue, I don't know if you mentioned what's the dating of the Shapira scrolls.
So the people who declared it a forgery declared it to be contemporary in their time. So it should, not older than a couple of 100 years or 100 years at most. The ones who declared it authentic, they date it to around 800, 900 BCE.
800, 900
Would be
BCE.
Yes.
You see, this makes this a transmission between pre-exilic text and post-exilic text. This is the importance of this scroll.
What's a pre-exilic text?
When we are talking about pre-exilic, it is when the Jews went to captivity. The Babylonian came and took them out and whatnot. So this is the link between the time period before, where the Jews had, and the time period after that, which continue to Dead Sea Scrolls and even today to the Masoretic text. This is the link between those two.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
Before the Babylonian exile you mentioned. So just prior to that, this is when the Shapira scrolls are dated to around 800 to 900. That's the range.
Yep. Or at least paleographically contemporarily to the Mesha Stela, which is that Moabite slab that's dated to around 800, like the time of David. So 800
way back.
Way back, like haystacks. Okay.
Way back. Fair enough. So sorry to interject. I just wanted to know the dating to ensure that, just so that the people know that this goes back way before the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it's the earliest that we can actually have a look at when we sort of glean back into history and what potentially the earliest Jews believe. Sorry, my kids have just woken up, as I'm sure you can hear.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
So yeah, now continue. You were mentioning that God's name was or Yod-Heh Vav-Heh was never mentioned once in the main body. But you guys continue. I'll be back in a sec.
No problem. Yeah, so that's the first and major stark difference. The second difference is that it is all in the first person perspective. It is all coming straight from the lips of Musa alayhi salam. God, our God, told me. Then I went, etc., etc. I did this. When I left, this is what happened, etc. All from the perspective of Musa alayhi salam. So all of these later anachronistic inclusions into the text are completely missing, because the text is extant in the portions where you would see them, and they are not there. So for example, this happened when Canaan was still in the land. That portion of Deuteronomy is missing. And scholars have long recognized that this must have been by the hand of somebody who's recalling the incident long after Canaan had been expelled. So after the time of Joshua. Right? Because when Moses was there, this would make no sense for him to write, because they've always been in the land. And they were not completely expelled until after his time. Things like that. And what do we know about the Torah? What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says? That the Torah was given strictly to Moses. That Musa alayhi salam had slabs of commandments and a Torah, a scroll. Suhafi Ibrahim wa Musa. Musa alayhi salam had scrolls and alwah, slabs of rock inscriptions. And that's exactly what we find in this document. There is no other law code. There's nothing there in this particular recension of the book of Deuteronomy. There's no other laws outside of the Ten Commandments and a different version of the Ten Commandments. So how is it possible that the Quran would basically preempt this discovery by a good 1200 years? Was Moses Shapira a secret Muslim? I shouldn't have even put that out into the world to manifest, because I'm pretty sure Christians are going to take that and run with it now, which is very, very expected. Okay, but so here you just have Moses saying that he received the Ten Commandments and that he has a scroll. He has a scroll, and this is a scroll that actually can be read in daily prayer and recitation and for meditation in the synagogues, etc., etc. And it matches with what it says, with what is said in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 3. Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 3 is like an old tradition that recalls how the Torah used to be recited. And it says that it can be recited entirely in the morning hours. So in Jewish morning hours, that's from sun up to before Maghrib, along with commentary. To recite the entirety of the Pentateuch in any type of discernible manner would require at least 24 hours. At least 24 hours. And you add to that commentary and the teachings, like Nehemiah says, then you have to add maybe double that time, or if not more. So this actually matches up with descriptions that were shown in Nehemiah and in Kings and in other portions of the Old Testament, where it seems like the original scroll was something much smaller. Okay, something much smaller. Third, there are some details. So I haven't gone through the entire transcription of the book, unfortunately, and I'm sorry to say this. So, but these things are the ones that are more stark and advocate a large number of changes. And some of the text is still similar to what is found today in Deuteronomy. Okay. And so another thing is the version of the Ten Commandments. The version of the Ten Commandments includes a new commandment, which literally says, "You shall not hate your brother in your heart, for I am God, your God." Do not hate your brother in your heart. I am God, your God. This is another commandment that was given to Musa alayhi salam. The word Sinai is not used. The equivalent, or like the alternative of Sinai, which is Mount Horeb, is used. And for somebody like Shapira, who is a Christian convert from Judaism, Sinai is very precious to him. There would be absolutely no reason, especially since it doesn't even increase like the authenticity value or the how much money he would make of it potentially, etc. If he were to leave it as Sinai, but instead he opted for the less common name, which is Horeb. That the revelation was given to him on Mount Horeb. And then I've already mentioned that it lacks all the other laws. There's basically a shorter version that it excludes the sacred name Jehovah or Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh. Do you have any other differences that you want to highlight, Ali?
Yes, Akhi, inshallah. You see, we started to say there is no such a thing as the Torah. We went to a couple of recensions of the Torah. Now, how is this Moses scroll relevant to this, all of these Torahs and whatnot. Why is this relevant? Let me give you one example. According to the book, The Meaning of the Dead Sea Scroll, in chapter 6, they talk about, and they say this, and some may be described as an early Jewish living Bible, that is talking about the text which they have, since it features many interpolations, insertions of other material, and expansion of the biblical text. The book of Deuteronomy contains several speeches that are not found in the Masoretic text. This, you see, Akhi, this is a study, if I'm not mistaken, not that long ago. They give an example. The example is relevant, they say. They say scholars have been puzzled over Joshua's apparently unwise movement. Note that the Septuagint places the event of Mount Ebal after Joshua 9, verse 2, which hints that the passages in Joshua 8, 30 to 35 in the traditional text may have once belonged elsewhere in the book. You see, these are the floating texts. They go on to say a relevant text for this passage is Deuteronomy 27, verse 4, in which Moses commands the building of the first altar on Mount Ebal. Mount Ebal. The Samaritan Pentateuch, you remember I was talking about the other Torahs which exist, and this one is Paleo Hebrew, which is the oldest one. The Samaritan Pentateuch and Old Latin, however, have the reading on Mount Gerizim. You see? So the traditional text of today that the Jews use says Mount Ebal. And the Samaritan and the Latin, Old Latin, this is not the Vulgate, it is the forerunner to Vulgate, Old Latin, that says Mount Gerizim. They go on to say, this shows that on Mount Ebal in the Masoretic text and the Greek text is a later Jewish polemical change, that the first altar was to be built in Samaritan Gerizim. So this guy is talking about that the Masoretic text and the Septuagint, which has the reading Ga'aval, Ge'aval, this is a later polemical change. You see? They say how this change happened. This is very, very interesting. They say a three-stage history in the development of this command-fulfilling passage has been proposed. 3 stages. The first stage, the altar was simply to be built at the unspecified place. See, at first, unspecified place, wherever the people crossed the Jordan. The second stage was that the northerners, perhaps the Samaritans, specified the site of the first altar as Mount Gerizim. And the third stage, Jewish scribes discounted that claim and changed it to Mount Ebal. You see? So this guy is saying we have different recensions with different texts. The later one is obviously a change based on the earliest one. But before the earliest one, which is the Samaritan Torah, has Mount Gerizim in it, before that came about, we don't know what the place is. I told you, why is this Moses scrolls relevant to what we are talking about? What was that place? They talk about this, let me read it. The differences between the Moses scrolls and Deuteronomical version are extremely subtle, but they make a world of difference. The Moses scrolls, Gerizim and Ebal are located across the Jordan westward in the land of Canaanite in Araba. Okay? Araba means desert. It could mean desert or dry place, but it also could mean the land of Arabia. This makes the place very relevant. They go on to say even the version of Joshua in 4Q Joshua A, which are in that Sea Scrolls, also shares shares the same idea with the Moses scrolls regarding the location of Gerizim and Eval in itself, which means it is not a singular reading, which means it is not a scribal error. You see, it has multiple families of text which are given us. Okay?
Wait.
This is, by the way, one of the biggest proofs that these Moses scrolls cannot be forgery. You see, when this Moses Shapiro guy came with this, the idea of multiple sources for composition of the Torah was just there. This Wellhausen was only 34 years old at the time. So this guy never, ever, ever could have known about these priestly additions. How could he remove explicitly things which already Wellhausen is talking about are priestly sources adding in it? You see, he never could have done this. This is one of the reasons.
He kept his manuscript in a bank vault for 5 years until he read the works of the German revisionists like Bleich, and then when he read it, it clicked for him, and then he decided to reopen and try to get others to try and verify.
Okay.
Wait. You're saying that what we're reading today here in these white areas, the Moses scrolls doesn't have any of these whites. You're saying that later on the priests, right, decided to add in their own commentaries or their own understanding of things or eisegesis or whatever it may be. Slowly but surely it started being added into the text to what we now see and conceive the present day Bible or the old Deuteronomy to be.
Exactly. This is Wellhausen came with it. And many scholars of today accept this idea. But Achi, think about it. I told you about the relevance of these Moses scrolls. You see, they are given all of these chapters of Deuteronomy, which is in today's Deuteronomy, and all of these blank chapters are not in these Moses scrolls. But the point is this: between chapter 12 and chapter 27, which already is accepted by the scholars as being priestly sources. Think about it. Paul says in the book of Galatians chapter 3 verse 13 that a man who is hanged is cursed. What is he referring to? He is referring back to the book of Deuteronomy of today, chapter Vatachi, 21 if I'm not mistaken, or 20, right?
We should be here.
They should be here, which means these chapters are priestly additions, and we have now external evidence of these post-priestly additions, which means this text of Deuteronomy 20 and 21 is a later forgery by these priests, which means Moses did not write them, which means the spirit which was inspiring Paul to write his theology based on Deuteronomy chapter 20 and 21 was basing it on a later forgery, which means that the spirit which was inspiring him cannot be the truth of God. Otherwise, God cannot referring back to a forgery.
That's
you see?
wild.
This is the relevance of the Shapira scroll.
Paul could not adequately cite the text in his own Septuagint. Paul failed to accurately cite the text in his own contemporary manuscripts. I don't know why.
Surprise, huh?
Exactly. And you mentioned Joshua chapter 8. Joshua chapter 8, I think verse 3. It says that when Joshua was reading from the teachings of Moses, the blessings and the curses, he was reciting from the book of from the teachings of Moses, the blessings and the curses. The book of Deuteronomy in every single recension except for the Shapira scrolls does not have any blessings. It does not have any blessings. It only accounts for the curses that were given on Mount Gerizim. Oh no, on Mount Ebal. On Mount Ebal. The Shapira scrolls has now additions, which are the blessings that were given at Mount Ebal. An entirely different section that actually matches up with what Joshua called the teachings of Moses. These are the blessings that he recited upon the people of Israel. And then when he would recite them, all the people would say Amen. Amen. And then he would go to the curses, and whoever does any of these things shall be cursed, and the people will say Amen, Amen. And textual critics, including people like Richard Friedman, they say that this passage must have these curses, I mean these blessings, must have dropped out from the original scrolls because of what's called parablepsis, meaning that the opening line of both the blessings and the curses are very similar, so that when the scribe was initially copying it down, he thought that he had copied down all of it, and so he neglected to go back and actually add the blessings. And of course, there are other opinions as well. But this, the Shapira scrolls, accounts for an entirely different dialogue that was given that includes blessings in the book of Deuteronomy. So I found that interesting since you mentioned Joshua chapter 8. But I think we've spoken enough about this, and now, like I said, if you guys want to pick up the book called the Moses Scroll by Ross Nichols, or the Valediction of Moses, which he was just quoting from, you'll see all of the different scholars that actually back this perspective, their specific reasonings, much more detailed information. But what we gave you today is kind of like the meat and potatoes of the whole debate.
Let me conclude this room, then we can close it. We were talking about multiple recensions of the Torah, which means there are multiple Torahs which is going around. Which one is authentic? We went through all of the recensions, the ages, the dating, when were they written. After that, we went back, way back. We went to about 800 BCE to the actual external and objective evidence. What was the situation at the time? When this text was discovered, them people, which they call the scholars, you see, these were scholars. One of them is Ginsburg. Every book which you read on the Septuagint, Akhi, you see him popping up. So this guy was not a nobody or something. Yet, they go couple of scholars into a room in a hotel, but they look together, they say no text will survive for 2,000 years from Judean desert, they say, because that Sea Scrolls was not found yet. So they deemed this as forgery based on what? Based on codicology, based on philology. They said, you see, the resh which is used in these manuscripts is the resh which only the Russian Jew uses, not somebody from 2,000 years ago, they said, because this guy, he's an Ukrainian Jew who later on converted to Christianity, by the way. So this guy came, they said, no, it cannot be. The resh is not good. So they deemed it as a forgery. They said, you see, they are anachronistic cuttings in it. They said, if we look at the ancient manuscripts, underline of the manuscript, it will deteriorate. Yet, this one on the above side has no deterioration. That means Shapiro had done it himself, they said. Then they made a picture of him. You see, I wanted to send you that picture, which they publicized in the newspaper for everybody to see. But I was scared that we may get banned, Akhi.
Oh, we will. We will. If the algorithm is smart, we will.
So they came, they said, oh, forgery. This guy is a deceiver. He fled. His widow is searching for him. And Akhi told already what happened to him. Heartbreaking. After that, his widow, who had all of his properties, his handwritten transcriptions of all of this text, he gave it to a museum and scholars went to it. So what was deemed as a forgery, now based on objective evidence, is deemed not to be a forgery by Moses Shapiro, what they said. It is an actual text which goes back, way back, and it proved that the Torah which they have today in their hand has been corrupted by all of these additions.
To the mind that is opened and to the heart that is sincere, wallahi, just demonstrating the differences between two recensions that were both utilized by supposedly inspired New Testament authors, which is the Hebrew Proto-Masoretic and the Septuagint, is enough to show that the hands of scribes have tampered with enough relevant material that it casts doubt on the entirety of the message. Okay, but this scroll is on a different level of that. The scroll, if it is authentic, then it not only vindicates the consensus body of critical literature, but it also vindicates what Muslims have been saying for a long time. That فَوَيْلٌ لِلَّذِينَ يَكْتُبُونَ الْكِتَابَ بِأَيْدِيهِمْ ثُمَّ يَقُولُونَ هَذَا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ لِيَشْتَرُوا بِهِ ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا فَوَيْلٌ لَهُمْ مِمَّا كَتَبَتْ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَوَيْلٌ لَهُمْ مِمَّا يَكْسِبُونَ. Woe to those who write the scripture with their own hands, and then say this is from Allah, to profit with it a measerly gain. Woe to them for what their hands have written, and woe to them for what they earn. And that's all I have to say.
Barakallahu feekum.